Be smart, dummy, dummy, be smart. He said that fool, you weren't cool. He took a book to your school. Be smart, dummy, dummy, be smart. Don't get shocked if you get mocked. It's what you find when you use your mind. Don't you sweat it, look 'em in the eye. Don't regret it, hold your head high. Be smart, dummy, dummy, be smart. Try to show some tenderness, even when they're playing chess. You think it's dumb to be smart, but that's the way you make art. So be smart, dummy, dummy, be smart.
Hi, I'm James Eade, and I live in the divided states of America. And how do we become united again? One of the things that I've come across is that people are trying to change each other's minds, and we're not so good about changing our own. So I wanted to think about how could I help people learn to change their minds? And one of the things I thought of in 2024, what I could do for this year, what's the theme for this year for me? It's a theme of addiction and recovery. Because in my experience, people were looking at people who are addicted to substances, whatever they may be, behaviors, all these types of things, people would be judging them harshly. And, judging others is not necessarily the way to go. But if you get judged, often I have heard it's a lack of willpower. The whole campaign of just say no, for example, was if it's so easy to just say no, why wouldn't everybody do it? Is there something more to it? And I've asked a guest to come on the show and help me understand this situation a little bit better. Yudhishthira, the co-director of Ananda Bay Area School of Yoga. Thank you for joining me.
You're welcome, Jim. Thanks for having me on again. It's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you as well. And I wanted your perspective because you've known addiction, you've known recovery. And have you ever been told that you had a lack of willpower?
Well, I've certainly told myself at times in my life that I had a lack of willpower.
Sure. We're own harshest critics. Yeah.
It was clearly apparent. And there are still times in my life that I succumb to a lack of willpower. But, what I've learned is that oftentimes for certain things, for example, although I don't drink or use drugs any longer, there are certain things in my life that I definitely avoid. Refined sugar, for example.
Right.
And yet I've learned that it's better to allow myself to have some things that are sweet sometimes and then go for longer periods of time feeling completely satisfied. So, is that a lack of willpower? I think it's more of a strategy that works for me. And it doesn't work, by the way, for all substances.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I'm also aware of that because of the fact that I myself, I don't want to get too far off from your original question, but I know there was a time when I was drinking and someone bet me I couldn't go 6 months without a drink. And I clearly had some form of willpower that allowed me for 6 months to go without drinking. I forget what the reward was.
Yeah, better been worth it.
But apparently something was worth it. And I think it was more a matter of my own ego really at the time. And so for 6 months I went without a drink. But on the first day after that 6 months was over, I got drunk.
Right.
And so was that willpower? I'm not sure. I just think it was there was something else going on that made me, again, I think it was my ego, my pride, my vanity that made it possible for me to say, no, I'm not going to drink for 6 months. And it didn't matter how much better my life was during those 6 months.
Right.
So with sugar, it's something different. With I have a diet that doesn't include much in the way of flour or oil. But today I had a chance to have lunch with someone who I really care about. I don't get a chance to spend time with. And we met at a place and they had a vegan, plant-based margarita pizza. And you know what? I ate 2 slices It was marvelous.
There you go.
It was just like great. Now, I wasn't going to go in and eat cheese or, because I eat a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to do that. But to have a plant-based pizza available,
Right.
I had 2 pieces. I probably won't have pizza again for 6 months.
Right. Right.
So I'm not sure how that addresses willpower here, but I don't think addiction really comes down to a matter of willpower at
Right.
all.
And I gave up drink for 4 years once because I was in a relationship where the woman did not approve of drinking, and so there are some things that I valued more. and
Yeah.
but so that was an idea of willpower. But once that relationship broke up, I went back to drinking, and it was worse than it ever had been before. It wasn't one of those things where I picked up where I left off. I picked up harder. I drank more.
Uh-huh.
And so I don't really buy the whole willpower type of thing because I've demonstrated enough willpower in my life. What I found is that addiction is a little bit more cunning than what you would think of as, like, say, when I use the word craving as an addict, I might mean something different than a person who doesn't have addiction problems, as what they say is craving. Because I might want a sweet, and okay, I can resist the sweet. So therefore, they think that they have willpower over it. But I can do that too. But when I'm in the throes of addiction, which I was for many years, it was a compulsion. It wasn't something that I had choice over. I had surrendered the power of choice.
Sure.
And
I'm sitting here as we're talking, Jim, and I'm realizing that there's a difference between willpower and willingness.
yes,
And those 2 things oftentimes they're sort of side by side, and they're interwoven in a way. For example, when it comes for many people I've worked with through the years, um, sometimes in classes, sometimes one-on-one, people need to be willing to make a change.
yes,
And that's very different than having the willpower to change everything all at once on your own.
yes,
And oftentimes that willingness, for example, whether it's to attend a meeting or to go to a yoga class. And, I'm thinking of a story, as you know, and I'll, with anybody else who's watching this now or in the future, I am a disciple of a guru, Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda. And Paramahansa Yogananda is marvelous to me in part because he's relatable. He lived in the 20th century, but he's recent enough, that it doesn't feel like, Jesus who lived 2,000 years ago. And it's not that Jesus is not worthy of being a guru. It's only
sure,
that his teachings are challenging to understand sometimes because of the language. Yogananda, not so much. And
interesting.
Yogananda oftentimes worked with people in ways that seems counterintuitive. He had a disciple, a devotee, a student who came to him and said, look, I like to drink, and can I continue to drink and still be your disciple? And Yogananda said, of course. And the guy was a little surprised. He said,
Yeah.
well, okay, well, I like to smoke. I'm a smoker, and can I do that?
Uh-huh.
And Yogananda said, sure, go ahead. And he said, well, all right, well, as long as we're going there, I also love to be intimate with women. And the guy expected Yogananda to say, no way. And Yogananda said, well, great, go ahead. And are you willing to meditate in these techniques I'm going to share with you? And the man said, yes. He was willing to do that. And over a relatively short period of time, by tuning into Yogananda, by doing the practices of yoga and meditation, that he became, I'm trying to think of the word, this is out of the Yoga Sutras, by the way, he became disinclined toward the other things that he used to feel so strongly about. And it's simply that he didn't have the taste or the inclination for them.
There
But
you
he
go.
was willing to put some of his energy towards a change.
Yes. And that's an interesting point, distinguishing between willingness and willpower.
Yeah,
One of the things that I remember Krishna told Arjuna, that to make contact with his higher power, Krishna, it would free him from the bondage of self-will. And that was a kind of a phrase that leapt off the page for me. But you mentioned Yoga Ananda, and I remember the autobiography of a yogi. That was my introduction to him. And
sure.
so just as a shout out to anybody who would like to read that book, I think that was very eye-opening for me in terms of the yoga approach to addiction, which was quite different from the approaches that I had experienced early on to try to free myself from the tyranny of addiction. And I had given up my willpower, but that didn't mean that I had no willpower to gain, because I regained it, and I now have more discretion about what is good and what is not good for me. Um, I,
Ah, well, that's, Jim, you just used an important um, an important word. The word itself, of course, is not important. What it represents is of great importance, and that is the ability to discern um, that which is true or good or valuable or healthy from that which is not. Um, there's in yoga, in the sort of the big world of yoga. Uh, in fact, my guru's title is Paramhansa.
mhm,
It means supreme swan. The value of the swan in yoga is actually its ability to separate water from milk. That is to discern what it needs from what it does not need. Sometimes it's described as sifting sugar from sand.
mhm,
It's that same sort of idea.
right.
How do I find the ability to discern and to sift through all the things in this world that I could do, that I can take in,
Mhm,
whether it's the news or whether it's um, fast food or whether it is alcohol? How do I discern what is right for me? And, that's a matter of discretion. That's
yeah.
the ability to discern. And, Jim, not a lot of people have that well-developed sense of discretion.
And it also grew over time. And I don't think I had a great deal of discretion early on in my recovery, but it grew. And the more I had time for the toxins to leave my system, and for my ability to think clearly again was returned to me, then my discretion was improved, my judgment was improved. And over time, talking with others, because that's another thing that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about. It was essential for me because I was one of those people that my disease was part isolation. I used to isolate myself from people. And thinking I was brought up on John Wayne movies, and I thought that I could just take care of myself and didn't need anyone's help in any way. And I learned that I needed a community, that I could not do it by myself. I needed to speak to others. And I don't know if you had that same type of experience, but they helped me develop my discernment.
Yeah, well, this goes back to there's a whole lot. Look, just for everybody who's listening, I always intended to be an MD. I've been a science teacher, for many years now. Uh, I've been a yoga teacher for even longer, and I mention that only because of the fact that addiction is looked at from a lot of different perspectives.
Mhm.
And, the researchers, the medical researchers, look at it as a disease, which fair enough. I'm not saying that's wrong. All I'm saying is that when I watch people who are addicts and are treated medically, that I haven't seen overall, and I don't know what the numbers are.
Sure.
So maybe I'm off. I haven't seen a whole lot of people be completely successful at trading one drug for another. I'm thinking about methadone, for example.
Right.
And that I've just seen people who end up continuously using methadone, in place of other opiates. You know, um, so in terms
Sorry,
of
you just reminded me of a Woody Allen movie where they stand up as kids and they say what they as what they are as grown-ups, and this little girl raises her hand. I used to be a heroin addict. Now I'm a methadone addict.
that's it right there. From a again the perspective of yoga, we operate at a very different level. When you look at things as a yogi, you operate immediately with two big concepts that interconnect, and that's karma and reincarnation. And so it changes the way that when we look at something like addiction, it's 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 not a single lifetime problem. And once you have that bigger picture, it takes some of the pressure off.
Right.
It's just, so many, and I'm honestly not being critical of any particular religion, only to say that if your view of this life is that you got to get it right this time around, woo, that's a
Yeah.
lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And there's clearly a whole lot of people who don't succeed,
Right.
you know,
And
and
I'm sorry.
so
I was just going to say that one of the things from a karmic perspective, if I get this correct me if I don't. You don't have to blame anybody for your addiction. You don't have to say, "Oh, I was brought up wrong," or "My mother or father did this," or if this had only happened instead of that, I wouldn't be an addict today. Um,
that's exactly right. Because if you look at it from a karmic perspective, and from the with the perspective of reincarnation being a chance to get things right over and over and over again, always with the opportunity to improve and always carrying with you the improvements you've made.
right.
All right, then that changes everything. And it also means, from a yogic perspective, that we have chosen the family that we have been born into because it will offer us exactly what we need. That doesn't mean everything is wonderful.
No.
In fact, it may mean that you have a father who beat you. It may mean you have a mother who's like my mom was an alcoholic, and I remember going around opening drawers, going underneath a sink, going into her closet and finding liquor everywhere.
Right.
But am I going to blame my mom for the addiction I had? Nope, I won't do that, because of the fact that after that, I needed that as a model of what not to do. It doesn't mean I didn't do it for a while, but I sure don't do it today.
Right. And, I also think that, it's common and very forgivable and understandable to blame others. But I think one of the things about my recovery, where it really turned a page for me, was when I stopped blaming anyone else and took accountability for my own actions. And I thought that this was one of the things where I said to myself at the time, I said, everyone can use this, but for me, this is nothing but an excuse for my behavior. And it's my behavior that I want to change. How do I change that? Well, I think it's an inside job. I can't change anything outside unless I change myself first. There's no change without change within. And I think that by focusing on myself, improving my discretion, improving my ability to act more kindly, and to not judge as frequently. All of these things added up in my overall recovery to living a better life. And it was a life worth living, and not chasing the next high, not chasing something that would make me feel better, not having to change the way I felt. Because if nothing is permanent, if I feel a little bit anxious, I can wait a little while, take a deep breath, and the feeling will pass. And these are things that I've learned over time. But if you had told me that when I was in the throes of my addiction, I wouldn't have believed you.
Precisely. And that is, well, a couple things. First of all, I appreciate you're talking about the change needs to happen from within.
Yes.
And that is I don't think that there's another way it can happen. Now, something can happen externally that may trigger something within you. That much is true.
Sure.
I think we've all had events occur in our lives that have changed the course of our lives.
Yes.
And so it was something external that triggered an internal mechanism within us that activated a change. A couple things are coming to mind here as we're talking, Jim, and that is, I want to promote a book by a friend of mine, absolutely marvelous book called Freedom from Stress by David Gamow. And it is all of the teachings of yoga without any of the spiritual components. It is simply a roadmap. And my friend uses a wonderful example in that book, because so much of what happens in the process of our behavior is reactive.
Yes.
And it's unconscious.
Yes.
He uses a wonderful model within that book of being on a crowded subway car, getting into this crowded subway car where you can only hang on and you're like sardines.
Yeah.
And someone keeps kicking you in the back of your leg, and you take it for as long as you can. Eventually your anger is so great that you are going to turn around and confront this person and tell them with all your anger and energy and self-righteousness to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And you turn around and you see a person with dark glasses and a white cane who is just trying to maintain his own, and the person's blind.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, why can we not react to these situations and just presume that someone is blind?
What a great metaphor for it, because the one I have told myself is that, of course, we get stimulus and we have these from the amygdala to the behavior. We have a neural network that's engraved with our old behavior. And so stimulus happens and respond like we're Pavlov's dogs. Well, we're not. We can pick up the needle, to use an old term. I hope my viewers can relate to picking up a needle and move it to a new path. But that new path leads to different behavior. But at first it's scratchy. It's not so well worn. It's not an easy groove. So you might have to pick that needle up multiple times before it wears a new path. And then it becomes, and the music that needle plays on that new path is far sweeter. And the behavior that it results in is much kinder, much more gentle and loving. And these are the types of things that you can do with perseverance, because it's not an overnight sensation. It's one of those things that you have to work at.
And it's a beautiful analogy, Jim. And it's actually quite literal and factual in terms of neural anatomy as well. And, which is to say that
it has that going for it.
The process of creating a new pattern of behavior is one of establishing new neural connections, new neural pathways, and that once those pathways are first established, it's not easy to follow them.
Mm-hmm.
However, with repetition, those pathways become more well established, and the amount of static involved is lower. You know, so it's a matter of choosing, being willing
Yes.
to make a change.
And the willingness comes first.
Yes.
And then we also, with our own internal self-critic, we can become very impatient with ourselves and give up before we get to the point where we change our behavior. This is something that I try to be as compassionate as I can with people that I work with, and to remind them to go easy on yourself. You know, recovery is not easy. Recovery is not, you know, something that will happen, you know, as soon as you make one effort, then you're all better. No, it's a process that takes time and energy and repetition, and you will see progress over a period of time. And that's what you want to cling on to, not to the perfectionist that we can, you know, say, oh, if I couldn't do it once, I'll give up, you know.
Yeah.
And even people that have relapsed, you know, this is what I try to tell them, is that, you know, it doesn't matter when you get it, as long as you get it, and keep working. You know,
You remind me of the time, and you will have heard me speak about this in classes before, but you know, for many years I taught at a residential recovery center in Scotts Valley, and you know, I would go in and teach an hour-long yoga and meditation class.
mm-hmm.
For your viewers, it's helpful to understand that the style of yoga I teach is called Ananda, and Ananda yoga incorporates the classic yoga postures and accompanies them with affirmations, so that the body is doing and the mind is repeating a cooperative practice. And so you may call it a yoga posture, but there is an affirmation that goes with it. And so, for example, there is a particular yoga posture called chair pose. And so often people talk about their bodies as if it's a burden, as if it's something, you know, it's one thing after the other. You know, you know, first I got this, then I got that.
Yeah, right.
You know, my knees going out, my hips going out.
Yeah.
Okay, so in this yoga posture, your arms are extended, your knees are bent, your legs are engaged, your pelvic floor is tightened enough, but you're breathing and your heart is wide open. Your arms are extended, palms upturned. It's called chair pose. And the affirmation is, my body is no burden. It is light as air.
My body is no burden. It's light.
It is light as air. And you're drawing this energy from your legs into your heart, sending it out to your hands. And it just makes your body a channel rather than a mass that you have to carry around with you. And when I would teach yoga at this recovery center, I would only have an hour with these folks. And what I found is that within an hour, these people came in from hopeless when they first walked in, and many of them really were hopeless, and they would walk out happy. Now, it was short term.
Yeah, sure.
But because they
felt it.
They felt it, and they would come back faithfully every time I would be there. And the thing that would happen is that many of these people would go away. They'd do their 30 days. And, you know, then 6 months or a year later, they would come back. I'd see them again. And I would always give them extra energy, give them extra hugs, extra attention, because these were the people who were going to succeed. The ones who came back and said, I'm going to do it again.
Right.
And some of those people came back 2, 3, and 4 times. Some of my best friends who they would describe themselves as recovering alcoholics,
right,
have had long periods, decades sometimes, of sobriety, and then they would relapse, and then they would have another long period of sobriety. Those are the people who are using their willpower correctly. They are willing to go back and say, I didn't get it right. I'm going to do it again. And
very good. Very, very useful. Thank you for telling me. It leads me to another question I have. And I phrase it as abstinence versus renunciation,
Ah,
because you just triggered me to think of like abstinence when I'm trying to abstain. We have a phrase called white knuckling it. You're holding on
oh,
tight. And I think these abstinence is a thin cord to hang on to. And there's often relapses when you're just merely trying to abstain. But the principle of renunciation goes deeper into your heart, deeper inside to your core being. And when you renounce something, you're no longer tempted by it. There aren't these flashes of, I want to, I should, but I shouldn't. And that type of internal turmoil goes away when you are able to achieve renunciation. And it's not just saying the word, it's to feel it, that this is no longer part of my life. Whatever purpose it served in the past, it no longer serves. And it's a deeper commitment, but it also, by renouncing, you're also abstaining. So you get both. You abstain, but you're not holding on to as tightly because there's no need to hold on tightly. The desire is lifted.
renunciation is a word that has a much broader meaning than I think it is usually given in Western society. And I live in a community of renunciates, and what that is referring to is not simply renouncing something like alcohol or drugs or some worldly behavior. It's rather renouncing the appearance of permanence in the world around us.
Mm.
And it goes, and so that's what's being renounced. Now, there's another side to it, which is that when we renounce what is temporary but appears permanent, you might have noticed that you can make all the plans in the world for something to take place, and that sometimes they don't.
Right.
And you can think that this particular acquisition, buying this thing or doing this thing, is going to make me happy, and then you buy it or you do it, and you're left with the same feeling that you had before. So you pick up something new and you try that. Always try and reach outside yourself.
Yeah.
The value of yoga and meditation in terms of this matter of renunciation is that when we turn our attention inward, we begin to focus on those parts of us that are permanent and true. And when we renounce the material world, it's not that we are renouncing happiness or joy. In fact, we are finding that those qualities of happiness and joy abide within us, not around us. And it's a very different form of renunciation.
And the people that you start working with when they're early in the recovery or just trying to become free from the tyranny of addiction, they don't think that they could ever feel that way. They don't believe that they can feel joyful again.
Yeah.
And it's such a gift when you see them feel it, and you see the smile, and you see the contentment. And rather than, as I used to, chase higher and higher highs, I feel that this contentment, this feeling of peace, is so much more valuable and so much more permanent. Not that I'm peaceful all the time. Of course not. Every day is different. There's ups and downs in every day. But
Sure.
I can always re-establish that period of peace through meditation, through some sort of rituals that I practice that can center me again. And I have the confidence that I can do that. I no longer feel like, oh gosh, I got anxious. I have to change the way I feel somehow by ingesting foreign substances or doing some sort of behavior. I know the type of behavior that's necessary for me to do to become serene. And it's worked often enough that I know now the neural pathway is, more or less like kicking myself. Why don't you do it? You know how to do it.
Now there are still those moments, and almost every day for me, that, why don't I meditate longer when
Hmm.
I have the time? Um, I'm still thinking about the renunciation piece of it, and I've
Hmm.
realized that one of the, this idea of affirmation is such a powerful tool for creating new neural pathways within our minds.
Yes.
And, one that connects that um, practice of affirmation with renunciation is this affirmation: I will go forth, or I go forth in perfect faith in the power of omnipresent good to bring me what I need at the time I need it.
Yes.
Right? And when we are able, and sometimes I have to say that continuously in my head,
Yeah, I
to
know.
shift my attention from thinking things should be differently outside,
Right.
and instead to shifting my perception of them. So that is an active use of renunciation.
Yes.
So it's not just, renunciation sounds, I don't know, so boring.
Yeah, I get that.
and
Or
and
you're
it,
depriving yourself of happiness.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's just the opposite.
it is. Yes, that's been my experience.
And when you stop thinking you're going to be that this other thing outside of you is going to make you happy,
Yes,
suddenly you begin to realize, oh, I have a choice to be happy.
I am happy.
Exactly.
I can remember sitting on my couch wondering, what is this I'm feeling? It's a strange feeling. And I finally figured out after a few minutes, I'm happy. And hadn't been able to identify it. But now I can. I can feel my feelings and I know what they are. It's a gift you give to yourself. And I think that one of the affirmations that you taught me that it stuck in my head was, I am free, nothing on earth can hold me.
Yep,
And that led to a soaring sensation. And that is a joyful feeling.
it's true. And just to put it into its context, the first part, nothing on earth can hold me, in yoga is that affirmation is sort of joined with a standing forward bend.
Hmm.
And the second part, uh, um, nothing on earth can hold me, um, I am free, is when you stand up, open your arms wide, bring your arms above your head,
Yes.
heart's wide open, you're looking up, you're
Yep.
not trying to hold anything back.
Yep.
I am free.
Yes.
So nothing on earth can hold me. I am free.
It
And
reminds me of a book that I stumbled across someplace.
yes,
Freedom, the sense of freedom that I experienced.
uh-huh.
I wrote about, and the idea was to give hope to the hopeless, because there's so many people that don't believe that they can have that soaring sensation of freedom again. And the message that I want to deliver is that you can. Anyone can. And what works for me may not work for you. And what works for you may not work for me. But to keep seeking until you find what works for you.
Yeah, one of the things I appreciated about your book, Jim, was um, the fact that you identified more than AA as pathways towards freedom from addiction. And um, my my backstory enough to know that my freedom from addiction came, and this is how I view it now, was simply a matter of having the craving removed from me.
Yes.
It felt like a divine intervention.
Right.
And it took me about a week before I realized that it had even occurred. I had alcohol, I had marijuana, I had amphetamines, and I had cocaine, all available to me. And I did not,
Partake.
I had not had the inclination to use any of them. And it took me about a week before I realized
Yeah.
what was happening.
Right. Right.
And I have never had a drink since. And that's been, I don't know, nearly 40 years or something like that,
Right.
or 30 years, 30 plus years. Anyway, I can't teach that to somebody else. I can't tell someone else this is how it works. because of my view of this lifetime as one that's held within a cycle of karma and reincarnation, my feeling now is that the karma was one that I had played out. I had burned out enough of that karma. And in lifetimes prior to this, chances are I died before that happened. There were certainly many times within this lifetime that my addiction could have
Yes, and
easily
nearly
killed me.
did. Yes.
Yeah. And so again, there's that other aspect, which is, I go forth in perfect faith in the power of omnipresent good. It was that omnipresent good, right? You can say the word God, all right, but whatever word works.
Right.
There was that divine intervention on my part that brought me to sobriety.
Yes.
And I've met, by the way, I've met other people for whom that's the case.
Yes, and I record mine in the book, where it happened to me, and I think of it as grace, divine intervention, and I do think that such things, in however you want to phrase it, term it, again, whatever works for you. If you want to call it God, that's fine with me. I use the acronym SAME, Source
Sure.
and Mother Earth, and the source of what the omnipresent good that you're talking about. The vibration of the universe. I think when I'm near it, I'm serene, I'm calm. When I'm too high or too low, that's when my life gets difficult.
Sure.
Vibrations and fear and shame were the vibrations that are too low. I have no discernment when I'm fearful or ashamed. And so these are the vibrations that I have to raise. But I learned the hard way that trying to get your vibration too high is unsustainable. And then the crashing lows will be nearly unmanageable and hardly possibly unsurvivable.
Yeah,
So
it's so true. It's again going back to this that we come in with a particular karma, and it's almost as if we have a particular level of ability to take in a certain amount of joy, and that sometimes our tank is full,
mm,
and we just need a break. Something else, something else. We need. One of my original yoga teachers in her early days at Ananda was working on the farm, and she'd come from Texas. She moved up to California to live on this yoga, in this yoga community, Ananda. And it was early days, and they were out there growing their own food. And she'd been eating nothing but straight out of the garden for days and days and days, breathing fresh air, doing yoga, meditating. And there came this time when she said, I can't take this anymore. And she walked down to the road, hitchhiked into Nevada City, had French fries and a Coke, read a newspaper,
uh-huh.
then went back in, and she was good.
Yeah.
She'd had all the joy she could take, and she needed a break. And then she was ready to go back and re-immerse herself in that joy.
I don't have any toxics in my system. I better get some. Well, that's funny. There is one last thing that I want to talk to you about.
Sure.
Because it's one of the things that because I wrote the book, I'm getting some backlash about that I did not preserve my anonymity. And anonymity is one of the things that in some programs, not all. And I first want to say that in AA, it is one of those principles, and AA has saved so many people's lives. I have nothing but good things to say about it. But there are things that I don't agree with, that they're part of the party line, if you will, of AA. And the preservation of one's anonymity is one of those things. And the disagreement I have with that is what I was taught by the gay community. They taught that you can be out, but you don't out anyone else. For example, I will preserve your anonymity if you want me to. In your case, it's okay. So we talked about it before you were on the show. And but if you want your anonymity preserved, I'll be more than happy to do that. to any future guests. But my anonymity, I have broken it. I'm out there. I am an addict, and I hold my head high and look people in the eye. I'm not ashamed. I am proud of anyone who has walked the path of recovery. Because it's not easy, and I want to support, and I want you, whoever you are, to feel good about yourself, that you've changed, you've got the willingness to try to recover from whatever your addiction is. Because that is something that I think, if pride is a deadly sin, then I'm a dead man talking, because I'm proud of a lot of people that walk through the doors of any meeting anywhere and say, yes, I have this problem. Yes, I need help. And no, I can't do it alone. So I think that by offering myself as an example of someone who was near death and is now living a life worth living, that it can help. And that's the goal of writing the book, of having these shows, is to overcome the sense of hopelessness or the feeling that you're alone, that you're unique. You have to be such a bad person that you felt under the tyranny of addiction. But no, there's so many explanations why some people are addicts and why some people aren't. And it does no service to compare yourself to others. It's all about changing yourself. It's an internal, inside job. And I know that you believe this, and you've been helping me along the way with your insights into the yoga approach, which, if it works for you, tremendous. If it doesn't work for you, try something else. Find what works, because there is an answer out there for everyone, I think. I mean, I can't be positive about that, but I believe it.
Well, if my feeling is that if someone is addicted and dies in this lifetime, as happens every day around this planet, that they will have another chance. And
Right.
so if someone dies as an addict, look, it may be tragic for the for the people around that person, but for that particular person, it's not the body. The body died, but the person did not die. But you just brought up a number of things for me, and one of them is that anonymity is not just about addiction. That I've been working with people one on one and in small groups, large groups for decades now, and I have simply learned that whatever anyone shares with me of any nature, whether they say this is private or not, I don't discuss it with others.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so their anonymity is preserved simply because, it's just a matter of integrity on my part to not wanting to do that. Now, the whole idea of anonymity in terms of AA, it's an interesting topic, and I used to not understand why people continued to refer to themselves as a recovering alcoholic when they were clearly clean and sober for decades.
Right.
But for many of those people, is so important that they continue to identify themselves as recovering,
Yes.
not recovered. However, I've also seen people for whom that became a plateau, a ceiling, and they were never going to rise above that point unless they stopped identifying themselves as addicts. Because here I was an addict by any measurable standard, to alcohol, to drugs, to a lifestyle that encompassed those things. I was addicted to all of that, and I will never refer to myself as a recovering addict. I will not refer to myself in that way. It is not correct for me to do so. For someone else, it very well might be. And I simply do not relate to myself. I am not in any way, I can be around people who are drinking. I don't want
Right.
to,
Right.
because one of the basic fundamental teachings that Yogananda brought was that environment is stronger than willpower.
Yes.
All right. And so, I remember one student who came to the camp, and he came there, and I was working with him after class, just counseling him.
Yes.
And I was, saying, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. Here you are, you want to get clean and sober. And well, where do you work? Oh, I'm a bartender. Oh,
Yeah. Right.
okay. Well, all right. Well, where do you live? Well, I have an apartment above the bar,
Hmm.
and that's where I live. So he lives and works in a bar. The chances of that guy getting clean and sober are pretty low, simply because the environment that he's in is going to be stronger than his individual willpower.
Yes.
And it's true for all of us. And it's one of the reasons, going back to this matter of renunciation, which we talked about earlier, it's one of the reasons I live within the community I live in here in Mountain View and at the Ananda community, is because of the fact that most of the people around me live with that same sense of that bigger picture of what's going on, that we can find the beauty in the world around us. We can find the goodness in others. And we can also acknowledge the fact that this is not a permanent setup. This is all temporary. Everybody knows it, but everybody acts like it's never going to end.
So,
And so when it comes to this matter of anonymity, what I am not anonymous about ever is going to be, I'm not anonymous about the fact that I am happy, that I am joyful.
yes.
Those are the things I'm going to put out there. And I am not going to identify myself as an addict.
You know what? You probably didn't realize that, but you just changed my mind. Scrolling across the screen has changed your mind, and I think that you just successfully allowed me to think more deeply about this, because I've been identifying myself as an addict, and I have to ask myself if that is true. And I don't want to level off as a recovering addict. I want to go beyond that. And so I've got some thinking to do. I want to thank you for your perspective, for coming on the show, talking about addiction and recovery in such an open way, and reminding people that we have the ability. And sometimes I think of the power as not my own, but I'm able to channel it. And by channeling the power, I can affect other people's lives and help them become as happy as they were meant to be.
And you are doing that, Jim, right now.
Thank you. So thanks again. And we will be in touch, I am sure.
All right.
Yudhishthira, I just want to thank you again for the service that you provided to me and to others.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And it's truly what I was meant to do. And I'm happy to have the chance to do it. So blessings, and thank you for having me.
Blessings. Okay, I'll take you off stage now. All right. Yudhishthira from Ananda. I've taken a class or two from him, and he's been an inspiration for me and an essential part of my recovery. And I'm still learning from him. I want to let you know that you change your mind, crawling across the bottom of your screen now. But this is now, I've changed it to info@aru.tv. That's a way, if you want to reach out to me and perhaps be a guest on the show and talk about your experiences. How did you find your way after being in the throes of addiction? How did you free yourself from it? Because it's all about freedom. And if your ability to free yourself, can it work for others? And it doesn't necessarily have to work for all. There is no one size fits all. There is no one answer for everyone, at least not that I have experienced. But by following the path that you were meant to follow, you will find this freedom. And so if you can find your path, walk it. So thanks again for being on the show, or for viewing the show. And we will see you next week, hopefully, and every weekend